My curiosity for oil paints has been growing more and more, and the time has now finally come where I want to dive into the world of painting. Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Selena, and I have no painting experience. I come from the planet of drawing. I like pencils and graphite, colored pencils, pastel pencils, everything I can grip tight and work on those sharp details. Occasionally I do work with mixed media such as watercolor and gouache, which would classify as painting. However, let's be real, in the end I just cover everything up with colored pencils. I have never finished a purely painted artwork. So this video is for everyone who has also been curious about oil painting and wants to join me in exploring all the new materials needed, finding out on how to approach such a painting, or who people who do have experience and just want to see me do all the beginner mistakes for the purpose of entertainment. I started with sketching the whole composition, and for my first oil painting, I didn't dare to attempt a portrait, so I chose a still life with some tomatoes. So this is probably the only video in which you won't see me doing a portrait. For the purpose of getting familiar with this new medium, I thought it would be a smarter decision to focus on simpler basic shapes like balls and other geometric shapes. So the moment has come. I'm finally about to begin an oil painting. I am anxious, intimidated, but also very excited, and yeah, I think it could be really good. So here we go. So I got these canvas panels and wasn't sure if I still need to prepare the surface in any way. These are double primed, and I kind of trusted the guy at Blix who said you don't need to prime them any further. But when I did some more research, I found out that a lot of people like to triple or quadruple prime their canvas. But not only that, they also use sandpaper to smooth out the surface, which sounds very good to me, and I definitely want to try that in the future since the structure is very heavy. It's nice, but very strong for my taste. For transferring the outlines onto the canvas, I printed out my sketch in the size I needed. Then I'm marking the position of the sketch with a pencil on the canvas, and then I flipped the printed sketch and grabbed some burnt umber, applied a few drops right onto the paper, and smudged it really good with a paper towel. I made sure the whole sketch is covered before I flip it again and tape it down onto the marked position. Basically, the idea is to trace the outlines again with a dark pen, which will push the pigment onto the other side, and it worked surprisingly well. The reason I chose this transfer method is that 1, I didn't want to sketch right onto the canvas, and 2, apparently graphite would smudge the paint. I lifted the paper every now and then to check if everything goes well, and I couldn't find any problems with this technique. The only thing might be that it can get messy when you rub in the paint, but I guess painting itself is just messy. Alright, first step is done. I transferred the drawing onto the canvas with oil paint, and now it has to dry for 24 hours. So I'll come back tomorrow. By the way, if I'm doing something completely stupid, please let me know in the comments. I'm counting on you. One day later, I'm about to start the underpainting. So this is something I decided to do just to get rid of the white. And one thing when I researched oil painting was that fat over lean is very important. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix this odorless paint thinner with the oil paint to dilute it, and then I'm gonna put down a very thin translucent layer of base color. I don't really have any idea how much paint thinner to use. I'm assuming it's not really that much. I guess I just have to try it out. So one big advantage of using oil paint is definitely that I'm gonna take my sweet time to mix the colors on the palette, which I've never been able to do before because I've been working with watercolors and gouache. I mean, watercolors you can kind of reactivate with water, but gouache is just, once it's dry, it's done. And I'm definitely preparing myself for it to be the heavy, ugly stage of the painting. It's not gonna look very nice, I know that. I'm just trying to convince myself that it's really gonna look ugly and the stage is not there to look good. All the colors I bought to start out are cadmium red, cobalt blue, cadmium yellow, burnt umber, ivory black, and titanium white. I think that is all you need since you can mix any other color, although I have to say I'm not a huge fan of the cadmium red, it's quite orange. From my experience, having a burnt umber or raw sienna as a separate color is always good to have because you use it very frequently to desaturate and darken colors. For the underpainting, I know people have different preferences. Some like to just use one color like burnt umber. In this case, I decided to tone in the shapes with some sort of base color, and it also gave me a reason to start learning to judge colors from a reference and then mix it on the palette. It was my first time mixing paint with a palette knife and I love it. It really triggered my inner child and it was just a fun time being playful on the palette. Again, starting with a thin and lean layer, I needed to use a solvent to dilute the paint. I had no idea how much to use, so I just ended up dipping the brush in it and I think that was the perfect amount. The paint applied so smooth and fluid, it almost felt a bit like watercolor, but less frustrating. Okay, so I have two things to say after I did the underpainting. One, mixing oil paints is so much fun. Like, it's so smooth and buttery. I didn't expect it to be that much fun. And I heard somewhere a painter said an oil painter needs to love spending time on the palette, which makes sense because you have to mix colors all the time. And so the good thing is I love mixing colors. So I got that. And then the second thing I want to say, if this is the ugly stage, then come on. Then I'm not afraid anymore of oil paints because I come from using watercolors and the ugly stage with watercolors is on a whole other level than this. The ugly stage of watercolors made me want to quit using them so many times, I can't even list it for you. Okay, so now I have to let this dry for 24 hours again, and then I'll start the actual painting process. So a few days have passed. I was not able to work on this for a while, and in the meantime, my anxiety has been building up again. So I think it would be smarter to finish the painting in a shorter time. However, I was not able to do that, so just have to live with it. So yeah, trying to get mentally ready for the actual painting process, and now I am starting again with my favorite part, which is the color mixing. Wish me luck. But before you start painting, of course, I make sure to get good ventilation in this room, and then it was time to mix colors again. People have been saying never mix paint with a brush, it will ruin it, so I try to mix as many shades as possible with a palette knife, which I felt like in the end was a bit unnecessary. Using the paint right out of the tube without thinning it down worked better than expected, since I covered such small areas in the beginning with the tomatoes. I didn't apply a super thick layer because I didn't want to smear the paint around. Blending the colors felt pretty effortless. All I did was wipe the brush I was using really clean on a paper towel and then drag the paint over the edges to combine it into a gradient. The majority of time I was concerned about recognizing and mixing the colors right. I tried to tunnel vision on the color's value, how dark or light it seems, how saturated it is, and to what hue it belongs more. My goal was to let the tomato have the highest amount of saturation. Sometimes it's easy to make everything super saturated, so I usually mix in a little bit of burnt umber to bring down the saturation a bit. Working on a gray palette was new for me, and I noticed I had some difficulties matching the right value because I constantly thought the color I mixed was too bright, when in reality it was quite dark. This was probably the biggest learning curve for me with this painting, and it's something I have to keep improving a lot in the future. One thing I learned about being an artist is that it's not so much about blending techniques and handling tools. The most important thing is which decisions you make. That's where the magic happens, and that's how you know you are improving. It's not this one art supply which magically makes you better at drawing or painting. It's seeing and observing more. Seeing more color variations and choosing to put down more gradations. Actively choosing to leave hard edges on one side and softening others. It's these decisions which define who you as an artist really are. Until I started with a background, I was quite happy and satisfied with what I did, and then some problems and inner conflict started occurring. I had trouble mixing the right green tones again after the initial layer dried. In the end, it turned out a bit too saturated in my opinion. I'm also not quite happy with the gradient. While I was able to make the transition smooth, I think I could have done a better job at creating more gradations in between these clearly visible 3 green tones. For the background, I was also forced to add more linseed oil because the paint out of the tube was just way too stiff to cover such a big area. The rough surface also wasn't helping, and I felt like I was using so much more paint to get the background done. Another problem I encountered was that with filling in the background, I moved some of the edges I had put down before, which is the nature of painting, I guess. That's really when I noticed this is a whole new world for me, and I just have to give it time to get used to all the painting habits. So there you have it, this is the finished painting. In the end, I can't really complain about the result as my very first oil painting. So I want to give you a small conclusion and my thoughts of painting with oils. Positives first. I loved handling the tools and paint. Mixing the paint was pure joy, and applying the paint was very buttery and smooth. The long drying times give you more freedom to come back to areas later and blend them. And the paint on the palette can still be used hours later. Blending colors was pretty easy, and I wouldn't say it requires a special skill set to do so. You just have to be careful not to drag the colors too much into each other. Things I struggled with are judging and mixing the right colors. Now, this is more of an individual problem because I never painted before. I had to use all my brain juice to identify the right colors in the right places. An issue for me and a problem I never had before with drawing was you have to be aware of your edge control. In painting, edges can move and you have to be able to bring them back again. If I criticize this painting, I'd say I have too many soft edges and it could have used more harsher edges for more variety. Also, a small mistake I subconsciously did was I felt like I didn't really cover the canvas 100% with paint. I don't know if you can see this, but I feel like there's these tiny gaps in between the colors where they just haven't been touched with enough paint. And another thing I noticed is that while I got recommended to use cheap brushes because it doesn't matter, and I agree, you don't have to use expensive brushes. However, I did regret buying the cheapest brushes because while I was painting, some of the hair did come out and I have to pick it up from the painting. And finally, something I did wrong was to use too much linseed oil for the dark green of the background, which made it appear more translucent and you can kind of see the canvas shining through. Overall, it's good I am able to identify so many problems because it means I can put more focus on that in the future and improve that. But the most important thing for me is that it was lots of fun. At no part did the painting process feel like a hard struggle or drag. I know I have much more to learn, but I really want to put more effort into this medium. Now, this was just a still life. Will I be able to paint a complex portrait with all the facial features? No idea. But I guess it's just something you and me have to find out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little excursion into oil painting, and I'll see you in the next video.